each required to find $500,000 in fraud presumes that there's widespread fraud and that they're all a bunch of cheaters and criminals. That is false.
EI is there as a temporary income support to help Canadians while they're transitioning to another job. But if the jobs aren't available, Mr. Speaker, then EI will be there for Canadians as it always has been.
The government is under...
Telling investigators that they're each required to find $500,000 in fraud presumes that there's widespread fraud and that they're all a bunch of cheaters and criminals. That is false.
EI is there as a temporary income support to help Canadians while they're transitioning to another job. But if the jobs aren't available, Mr. Speaker, then EI will be there for Canadians as it always has been.
The government is under fire today after a report in the Le Devoir newspaper suggesting federal workers have been given quotas to root out fraud. The newspaper says employees in charge of verifying claims were ordered to find nearly $500,000 in illegitimate claims, and it comes just weeks after Human Resources Minister Dianne Finlay insisted quotas were not on the table. Are the guidelines too tough? What are they? Are federal workers under too much pressure to uncover abuse, and could it mean some legitimate claims could get cut off? Are they really quotas or not? Let's find out. Joining me now in the foyer of the House of Commons is Kelly Leitch. She's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development. Chris Charlton is the NDP's Human Resources Critic, and Roger Cudner is the Liberal Human Resources Critic. All of you, thanks for being here. Kelly Leitch, for the record, here's what Minister Finlay stated in the House of Commons on February 1st when she was asked about so-called individual quotas.
Let's face it, there are no individual quotas for employees of HRSD who are looking at EI.
Okay, so then she used the word quotas. Here's what she said in the House of Commons today.
As I said before, that there were no quotas for individuals. There are objectives, targets, to be sure. Mr. Speaker, there's a big difference between the two when it comes to motivating and managing staff.
Okay, so she used quotas, and then she used targets, and she says there's a big difference. So what's the difference between a quota and a target?
Well, let's be clear, Evan. As the minister said, there are no quotas set for individuals. I think many of us have had roles, jobs, I know I have, where you have performance targets. So in my previous profession, I had a number of peer review publications I always had to have out every year so that I would be able to continue my academic track. What we've asked of individuals, because of the huge number of individuals that were ineligible for payments or fraudulent activity, we want to make sure that those individuals are dealt with. And it's about being fair to all Canadians. We want to make sure that the EI system continues to be there so that individuals have access to it when they need it.
Okay,
and that means making sure that fraudulent and ineligible payments are rooted out. And that's exactly what the minister is talking about.
So was she mistakenly using the word quotas on February 1st?
I don't think she's mistakenly used the word quota at any time. The minister's been very clear. There are no quotas. When you talk about a quota system, Evan, what you're talking about is making sure that there are ramifications if you don't meet your quota. There is no such thing with respect to that at Service Canada. We do, though, are making sure, we're very focused on making sure that ineligible payments, fraudulent activity are identified so that those Canadians that are playing by the rules, following them appropriately, receive employment insurance when they need it.
Let me just ask you one last thing. I'm just trying to determine if this is a distinction without a difference, because Minister Finlay said there's no quotas, although she did use the word quota, and you're saying that there's a big difference. But let me just show you what the form says. I've got it in my hand here. It's in French. There's the form here. And the line that it says here is réalisé en moyenne de 485,000 on économie annuelle. In other words, it says here each employee, when I translate, must realize an average annual savings of $485,000. So, and then it says the results are observed and you have to justify it. So where did this $485,000 come from? How was that number determined?
Let's be very clear, Kevin. A quota has punitive ramifications. No such thing exists at Service Canada. A target, like I've talked about, is making sure that we're identifying those opportunities that are fair to all Canadians. So as I mentioned to you before, I had performance targets as a physician. I had them all the time as an academic physician. We're encouraging people because we know that there are over several hundred million ineligible payments as well as those individuals that there has been fraud. We want to make sure that we recap those, just like we have the other $500 million.
But I understand wanting to root out fraud, but where did the number come from? I mean, there is a section, by the way, right here that's about grading the employer on achieving the targets, but there may not be a punishment. But where did the number come from? 485?
To be frank with you, Evan, I don't know how the number was determined. What I can tell you is that there is no quota system. There's no punitive ramifications to a Service Canada individual, but we do have targets because we want to make sure that the system continues to be available to individuals, because employment insurance, as you know, should be available to individuals as they need it if they're temporarily out of work.
Chris Charlton, the government says, and shouldn't the government be going after fraud in the employment insurance system? What's your concern about EI investigators being given targets? They don't, apparently they're not punitive, but targets as the government talks about. What's your concern here?
Well, first of all, none of us believe that there should be fraud in any government program, and that's a given. But when the government can go out and say that each person has to find $485,000 a year, and frankly, that's the total they've given us is $150 million a year of fraud in the system. That means they do have a quota. They're telling their employees, go out and recover that money for us so that we can pay down our debt and deficits on the back of the unemployed. Whether you call it a quota, a target, an objective, or rose by any other name, this is a quota. And what the government should be doing, we know that they have huge waiting lists for people to get service from Service Canada with respect to EI processing, with respect to getting their phone calls returned. Instead of putting resources into those things that would actually help unemployed Canadians, what they're doing is hiring more people to do enforcement and recover money from them.
But what's wrong with trying to recover money from them? What's fundamentally the problem if they're trying to encourage the stopping of fraud?
There's nothing wrong with stopping fraud. What the real problem is that they have a targeted amount of money that they want to get back. That suggests they somehow magically know where the fraud is. Wouldn't you then ask, well, how do they know that? And how did people ever get their claims approved if they already know what that number is? It's absolute nonsense. This is a government trying to get money out of an EI system that they don't put a dime into. They're punishing hardworking Canadians who've lost their job through no fault of their own.
Roger Cousineau, what's your view on this? You've seen the form here. First of all, do you think it's a quota? And if so, what's the problem? Or a target? What's the problem with that?
Well, if you get run over by a bus or hit by a dump truck, the result's sort of this pretty similar. So whether the minister, there's that issue over there. I continue to have a problem with the minister. Either she continues to purposefully misinform Canadians, or she doesn't give a damn about her files. She doesn't know her files, and we've seen time and time and time again that she's given misinformation out on particular issues. So, that's a separate issue about her capacity on these files, her willingness to understand her files and do something about them. But, what's going on here? It's a continued intimidation. I believe, yes, Evan, that we have to be vigilant on whether it's the tax system or EI system, whatever the system might be. But to set a dollar amount, to go out and try to generate a specific dollar amount. Maybe you might want to set the quota on each employee has to. No, just let me finish the thought.
Performance-based incentives are pretty common. Even police officers sometimes have quotas on, for example.
Well, let's go out and make sure that they're handling this. They're reviewing this number of files per month. Let's make sure that they're going through that number of files. But all of a sudden to set this dollar amount, to put a bounty out on those that are receiving EI benefits. We saw what they did in Bay St. Lawrence. They threw a blanket around. An entire community and cut everybody off, and then those people that were receiving benefits had to prove themselves to be innocent. And so this is just, and now they're sending 50 people out, knocking on doors and hiding behind bushes to do something that Canada Post could quite capably do. I think it's just the next round of intimidation by this government. It continues to be an attack on seasonal workers and on rural communities in this country.
So Kelly Leitch, it's pretty difficult. If I'm a worker, I'm just reading the form here. It says that I am certainly measured by the goal. I don't know if there's punitive damage. If I'm punished, if I only get $484,000, but I'm certainly evaluating. Clearly, there's a performance incentive to go after a pretty significant amount of fraud. Does this come from some sort of widespread study that there's either A, civil servants are laggard in this, or B, there's some massive fraud problem with EI?
Well, we know, Evan, that Service Canada collected and was able to bring back almost $500 million in ineligible payments or fraud just over the course of the last year. We know that there has been other opportunities that they have missed, and that's why we are focused.
That's not a
on
right
this,
number.
because
$500 million? Seriously?
112. It was 112 million.
No kidding.
And most of that was paid back. And don't forget, the system pays out almost $20 billion a year. So that's less than 3/4 of a percentage point. So as far as rampant fraud, I don't think that's the case.
Okay, Kelly Leitch, go ahead.
Let's be very clear. What Service Canada is doing is an audit, just like any small business would do, just like what any small organization would do, and any not-for-profit would do. They're doing an audit.
It's not an audit.
It's an audit of 1,200 individuals between January and March to look at how employment insurance is being distributed. And I've been a part of the YMCA, the Community Living Foundation. We have audit committees. We audit things because every dime counts. And I think that it's extremely important, as my fellow panelists have said. We want to make sure that there isn't any fraud or ineligible payments in the system, and that's what we're doing.
Unfortunately, I got to leave it here. Kelly Leitch, Chris Charlton, and Roger Cousin will be following this closely, and we'll have more on this later in the program. I appreciate all three of your perspectives on this.
Thanks very much, Evan.
We got more on this story coming up. We want to hear from you. You heard what the MPs had to say. Is cracking down on EI fraud in terms of that issue? Is the government doing, one, too much? Is the government doing too little? Or is the government doing the right amount? Or are you just not sure? Let us know what you think. Is the government doing too much, too little, not enough? Go to Facebook, go to cbcnews.ca, go to the QR code at the bottom of the screen. That'll get you involved in our daily conversation that we have with you every day. And if you have comments on anything you hear on the program, be part of our conversation on Facebook. Hit me with a tweet directly at Evan Solomon, CBC, or hit us up online.